Hello, I'm Jesse Hirsh, and welcome to Metaviews. Recording live in front of an automated audience. Today, I'm really excited to talk about something that, quite frankly, is close to my heart, which is soil and compost, and really making compost mainstream as a kind of revolutionary act. And I'm thrilled to be joined by my new friend, Tim, who, as we zoom in a little closer, is wearing a very cool hat and very cool shirt. But we like to start every episode by talking about the news, partly because Metaviews publishes a daily newsletter. And today we're talking about mutual aid in Los Angeles, which, as the fires are raging and the crisis is underway, there's a lot of folks in a lot of communities who are sharing what they have, who are organizing to create a kind of community resilience by, not waiting for official relief, but, restaurants sharing free sandwiches, people sharing blankets and clothes for people who've lost everything. And it's so empowering because it tells communities that you can respond to these crises together. You can find a way to kind of fight the helplessness and feel empowered fundamentally by that community dynamic. And so, Tim, this is where, we always like to throw to our guest and say, is there any news that you would like to share, or would you like to comment on some of the news that's out there? Partly because we want to inform our audience and let them know about what they should be paying attention to in the world. But also we want you, the guest, to, have an opportunity to start sharing your views on kind of what's going on and how people can engage with it all.
Hi, Jesse. Specific to those news out of LA, I want to say that the news is that we need to repair our small water cycles everywhere in the world, not just in California, but particularly in California. We've seen how dry everything is, and a lot of people don't realize how much water can actually be absorbed and saved in the soil. And there's really a lot of man-made, it's a man-made problem. So it's also something that we can fix. And I think if we don't want to have more fires raging uncontrollably, then we need to repair the small water cycles. That's my news. And
our audience loves that.
Yeah, and mutual aid, that's great. I'm also big on community composting, doing something not just alone, but in community. It's more fun. It brings people together, and it's something that's not necessarily a commercial activity. It's something meaningful, and you actually see the results of your community activity or labor.
Right on. Yeah. Right on. Well said. Now, our next segment on every episode is sort of what we colloquially call the WTF, but really it stands for what's the future? Because, of course, here at Metaviews, we do have an eye on the future. We do encourage people to imagine the future as kind of an empowering exercise, right? That if you can imagine a future you desire, you're more likely to get through today with the motivation and drive to get there. So in our What's the Future segment, we always like to ask our guest, what's something about the future that you are excited about, that you want to share with our audience to kind of inspire them? Doesn't have to be necessarily optimistic. We've had guests where, they shared a scary vision of the future because that's what motivated them to kind of do the work they do every day. So it's up to you, right? Like the future is what you want. And in this case, we're asking you, Tim, what aspect of the future kind of motivates you on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'm a glass half full person. So there's enough fear-based future stuff going on. So I'm excited about composting. I think the future belongs to compost, and there's a lot of potential in the United States for composting to divert food waste from the landfill, make it into something that we can use to heal our soils. So in my future, we are healing our soils, and we are farming with microbiology instead of synthetics. That's really my future. I think if we can do that, we're not just going to heal our soils, but I think we will also see then a decline of all these autoimmune diseases in humans and all that we're seeing. We will be healing us people as well. So that's the future I want to see.
Well, and that's an excellent segue into our featured discussion. And it's funny you framed it that way, in the sense that before we talk about compost, I kind of wanted to talk about soil, because compost is a means to an end, and the end is soil. And you really hit to the heart of my own experience when you talked about kind of immunocompromised, because I'm actually a recent convert to farming. While I spent my early childhood in the country, in the northern Ontario bush, with a bunch of American draft dodgers and crazy radicals and freaks, I spent most of my life living in the city. And it was only about 6 or 7 years ago that I decided I wanted to get out of the city. And interestingly enough, the autoimmune issues that I dealt with in the city, in particular my allergies, completely changed when I moved to the country, and when I experienced soil on a daily basis. When I was with animals who ate poop and then licked my face, right? When I was living in a kind of, for lack of a better phrase, friendly bacterial environment, in which I was being exposed to the bacteria, the microorganisms, the life that makes life, and it had a tremendously positive impact on my health. Granted, this COVID thing complicated everything for everybody. But it was a real a physical experience on the power of soil and the power of the kind of microbe. So before we get into composting, and especially because what you described in terms of your vision of the future, why is soil so essential to life on this planet? And why do we have to deal with a deficit that we've created from industrial farming, from ignoring the vibrancy of the soil? Why are we in this situation in which we're not only having to go, hey, wait a minute, soil's really important, but maybe we should be thinking a little more carefully about how we nurture and foster a healthy, biodiverse soil? Bit of a loaded question, but please, I'm curious, Tim, to hear your thoughts on why people need to know more about soil.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. I always do a little bit of a counter question, and that is, do you like to eat? I mean, who doesn't? So soil really sustains food production, and food production sustains humans. So if and then there's this other saying, it's like you are what you eat. So if your food, so your plants and the animals that you consume, have a narrow diet that's mainly synthetic based, synthetic driven, then your food isn't as nutritious as it could be. So it's all interlinked, and I think everybody wants to be healthy. The older you get, the more you value your health, and I think that's a no-brainer. And I can weave in another saying, and it's like, let food be thy medicine, right? So or medicine thy food, and it's all kind of like interlinked. And yeah.
Well, and this may be leading as a segue to our discussion on compost, but it doesn't have to. There strikes me as a scale issue here, that part of the deficit created by industrial factory farming is, I mean, granted, there is now a revolution in,
Mhm.
regenerative farming and
Yeah.
agroecology, in people who are recognizing the value of biodiversity in soil, of not using a tilling approach, of not using tons of chemicals and pesticides. But there
Mhm.
is still a massive amount of acreage in North America in which the soil is not getting the respect that it deserves, in which the soil is not being treated in the way that we need it to if we are going to have the food to eat and survive. So how do we address that scale issue, right? If we are now, those of us at the forefront of this revolution, if we are recognizing that soil is so essential to our life, our well-being, our health, how do we scale that up, right? How do we get more
Well,
people
you know,
valuing this part?
by going on podcasts and talking about it, that's one thing. There are incredible examples out there where farmers and growers have already proven and shown that it works at scale. And things like this take time. We are up against 70 years of a certain way of farming, the synthetic way, and there's multi generations that's the way we've always been doing it, and it's catching on. And the other thing is the farmers can see it in their soil. If your soil is becomes less and less or healthy, unhealthy soil, then no farmer really wants to harm their land. That's not their intention. So I think people are becoming more and more susceptible to listening, and then by sharing these stories about how farmers have reduced their input and therefore also reduced their input cost. So that's like where we can build the bridge to your wallet, and then it becomes a business case, and then it catches on. If it's just like a hippie kind of thing, then a lot of farmers will just like say, well, I'm not a hippie. But if you can feel it in your wallet, then it becomes a business case. So if we have these studies where people have hundreds of dollars per acre in inputs, and then all of a sudden they don't, because the microbes make it available through microbiology, and then people are more willing to listen,
Well,
and it takes time. That's the other thing. So we need to be persistent,
uh,
relentless about
uh,
it. So
uh, although I'll push back and say we don't have too much time. There is a sense of urgency, I think, and
yes,
you said a
absolutely.
few things there which I thought were really interesting to tease out. And one was, a lot of farming is multi-generational, right? Especially in North America, where land is expensive. A lot of farmers inherited their farm from their family. They do it the same way their family does. So it's difficult for them to wrap their heads around new ways of farming. That's partly where farmers like myself are, and a lot of farmers in the regenerative and agroecology space are new farmers, right? Because they're attracted to the science, they're attracted to, as you said, the commercial opportunity of doing things differently, because it is more profitable fundamentally to take this more sustainable approach. A lot of farmers get caught in the kind of, the soil gets degraded, they get pests, they get disease, they spray it, it makes the soil worse, and they don't fully understand that there's an alternative. And that's where I also say I agree with you that there is a revolution in podcasting, because from my own experience and from my own role in meeting with and communicating with farmers, they love podcasts, because you can be listening to the podcast while you're doing your work. You can be listening
Right.
to the podcast while you're in the tractor or in the combine. So it is. I give you kudos, Tim. It is a great approach to change minds. So let's. Although, before, one last thing before we get to compost,
Yeah.
for me, a soil starts with my animals. In that, we bought a farm where the soil was terrible. The land had been really let to go. So we started with animals because we need their poop. And by getting their poop, it then allows us to then generate that soil. So it ends up playing a big role. But I want to talk about compost because, you and I could talk about the farmer perspective. I'm certain for a couple of hours, and there are a lot of farmers who you do need to reach out to, Tim, and that's why I'm giving you positive reinforcement for the podcasting footwork that you're doing, as well as the marketing stuff, which we'll come to in a bit. But obviously, consumers, they know this through composting, right? Like people in cities, their interface to soil fundamentally is composting. I mean, gardening aside, right? There is, I think, a political awareness or a real desire to compost, partly because people want to reduce their waste. But like we talked about in the mutual aid, they want to feel like they're part of the solution. They want to feel like they're part of the revolution as a whole. So, tell me about the role of compost, both in terms of a medium by which to make soil, but where are you coming at composting from? And I don't just mean this from the marketing side, because we'll talk about that, but why in all the ways that you could have engaged what I'm describing as the soil revolution, why compost, right? There's all sorts of inroads if we were to want to champion better soil and champion better health. What is it about compost that made you think I think there's an opportunity here?
Well, before I'm going to answer to this, let me just circle back to what you said about using animals. I think that's a very important aspect, and that is also something that has been disconnected. If we think about a farm 100 years ago, then it would have been a farm where there would have been some vegetable or grain production, but certainly also animals all in one location. So the manures would have been in the same spot where the food production happens. Now what we have is soy and corn being grown in one spot, and with synthetics coming from yet another spot, and then to be shipped to other places where the animals are housed, and often like concentrated, CAFOs and stuff like this. So it's all disconnected, and then you end up with because it really needs to get shipped back to where the animal feed came from, but it just doesn't happen. So there's a crazy disconnect, and I think putting the animals back into the farming thing is absolutely critical.
But before you answer the question, I just want to tease out a thread there, because the consequence of what you're describing is the crushing of the local rural economy, right? Because they're having to go to all these global suppliers, because they're having to go to all these distant partners to allow their agricultural operation to flourish. It just decimates the local rural economy versus what you're describing with the animals and the feed. You then rejuvenate that local economy because you're getting your manure, you're getting your feed, you're getting, you're trading animals with other farmers to diversify your genetics. It all becomes local and much more sustainable. And to your point, a much healthier scenario as a whole. But let's get on to compost, because I think that's from your shirt and your hat clearly what you're passionate about. So again, why compost in particular, Tim?
Yeah, so I think compost has two angles, which sometimes are actually clashing a little bit. And one is the soil fertility angle. Okay, so compost is a very good tool to amend the soil, fertilize the soil, re-inoculate it with beneficial microbes. The other angle is the waste management part of composting. And in an ideal world, they could actually come together, and there wouldn't be waste anymore because it would be a resource. And unfortunately, waste management is also something, that there's a lot of cost factors in it. And
Well,
What
and let's
contamination
just
is an issue,
acknowledge
on a,
a lot of people just don't want to do waste management, right? It's kind of
yes,
got a
yeah.
bad rap.
Yeah, and it's like it can be nasty, but it's an important thing. And I think changing the perception of what is waste and what is resource management is important, because composting is, like I said, it's treated as waste management, but it could also be looked at from the soil fertility angle. So, um, you know, if we have municipal compost is important. So let's kind of like look at it from the waste management angle. Right now, only 4% of organics, food waste in the United States is actually recycled. That means 96% of food waste ends up in the landfill, and a regular municipal solid waste is 30 to 50% organic material. So that means almost half, or a third to half of what we put in the landfill that we pick up and truck ends up in there, and is on one hand lost forever, but B, is also creating an issue because it's rotting away anaerobically. So landfills are compacted, no oxygen, no air gets in, and then that creates methane gas, and it is problematic in terms of bad for the climate, but also it's I'm always trying to find angles that work for a lot of people, and
Sure.
I know that there's like half of the population that kind of believes in what's going on with the climate, and the other half isn't really convinced that it's an issue.
Well,
So
I wouldn't use the word convinced. I would use the
well,
word in denial.
yeah, let's put it this way. But I just want to give these folks another angle
Oh,
that
absolutely.
is not necessarily climate related, but directly linked to their own health. And that
Yes.
is,
Yes.
if you have a landfill, an active landfill, where there's methane gas, then other things that we put in a landfill, chemicals, actually attach to those gases, okay? And they float out of the landfill. And then, if everybody has a landfill somewhere in their area, they come down. So
Yeah.
if you think about PFAS, like Teflon pans,
Yeah.
that stuff has been proven to actually attach to those particles.
And
So
and I'll quickly.
it's healthier if we can have landfills that create not as much gas. We will have it's going to be healthier for your kids. It's going to be healthier for yourself. So
And I'll quickly interrupt and just
yeah.
give a PSA to our audience.
Hmm.
You can actually wash cast iron pans with soap. Like that old adage back in the day that you ruin your cast iron pan if you use soap.
Yeah.
Those were ancient cast iron pans. Contemporary cast iron pans are really easy to use. They don't give you the Teflon that comes from all the other
Yeah.
pans, and they
Yeah.
make a better meal. So
Yeah.
Metaviews endorses cast iron pans. But I wanted to touch upon something you said there, which is,
Yeah.
what I love about what you're doing is you're thinking about how to reach people where they are rather than expecting them to come to you. Right. So
Hmm.
whether it might be economic reasons to think about compost, it might be climate reasons to think about compost, it might be health reasons. I think that's a really brilliant way to kind of get past people's ideological barriers or get past the prejudices or preconceived notions. But let me try to get to the essence of it. Within the context of waste management and compost, are you focusing on diversion, or are you focusing on a new business model that recognizes the what I believe as tremendous value of compost? And
Hmm.
to your point, we're kind of pissing away that value by putting it into a landfill, by not understanding it. So what is, in a sentence or two, what is it that you're trying to do in terms of shifting the compost movement or our perception of compost within our industrial society?
Yeah, it's hard to just put it in two sentences, and we do need business models, but we also need partnerships and we need to kind of connect those. We need to connect where the waste happens with where the compost can be made, and then where can it be reapplied. And that's not just farms and market gardens. It's also in public parks. It's on the roadways, on the side of the road. There's a lot of compost to be made.
Well, you're in essence describing an ecosystem, right?
Yeah,
An ecosystem around
it's a
responsible waste
circular
management.
economy. Hmm?
Well, just saying, yeah, exactly. A circular economy, an ecosystem around waste management that's much more radical than the current one we have, which
Yeah,
is kind of ignoring it and hoping it'll go away.
yeah, and shifting the mindset from waste to resource. There are some things that we put in our trash can that are truly, kind of unusable. But the thing is really with composting or organics recycling is that 100% of organic material is compostable, okay? But with like plastics and the usual suspects in terms of recycling, right? There isn't 100% recyclability. There's all these compound plastics, and it's hard to actually recycle it. But with organic material, like if it has been alive, we can compost it, we can reuse it, and that's why it's well, if people like say recycling, I want them to first really think about their organic material, their food scraps, their yard waste,
And
because it's such a yeah.
well, and maybe that's where recycling isn't the wrong word. Maybe composting, right? Like if we are to embrace your kind of call to action of making compost mainstream, then maybe it needs to be distinguished from recycling. As I would argue, something more important than recycling. That composting is almost a moral duty. That when you're in the kitchen, when you're dealing with your food, and this is where I kind of want to shift into the marketing piece, because I kind of feel that it's been the underlying tone of what we've been describing, which is
Yeah.
how do we create a real shift in people's relationship to compost?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that, what's your ideal, right? What is your kind of, again, Metaviews, big picture? What's your big picture goal in terms of what you're trying to do in making compost mainstream?
Well, it's kind of we need a bundle of solutions, right? I'm a proponent of mandates, so organic waste diversion mandate, where it's actually illegal to put it in your regular trash, something
Right
that
on.
they've been doing in California. But I'm from Germany, and in my hometown in Germany, we had a municipal organic waste collection for 30 years. So, but it's mandated because, if it's just the thing is, mandates do work, but they also have their challenges, because then you're kind of forcing people to do certain things, and then they're not as mindful, and then they're putting things in there that don't belong, and then we're already contaminating something that we actually want to put out on our fields, and then we don't want to turn our fields into a landfill either, right? So we need to be mindful about this. And there's multiple puzzle pieces. So community composting is a great way. That is where people actually come together and make the compost as a community. So like they meet once a week, and you can have a chat. You can meet your friends. You get a little bit of a physical workout. You have fresh air, and you do see the fruit of your labor right away. It's like if anybody has never made a compost pile, it's just like a magical moment. I can still remember to this day my first hot compost pile that I made, where I put all this food waste in, and then like a few days later it became hot. I could feel the warmth, I could see the steam, and then some weeks later it was all gone. It was like a browny, dark, rich substance that smelled good. And I was like, where are all the banana peels? Where's all that stuff? It's like the transformation that happened, it felt like magic, right? And I think a lot of magicians really work with like optical illusions, something that you don't see. And that is what the microbes do. Like we don't see those microbes. But once you know that they're there and you can experience them, that's one thing. But then if you like have the opportunity to maybe take a little bit of that compost and put it under a microscope and just take one drop of a just like a tiny bit of a teaspoon, and then you see all these things under the slide, and it's like to me it was like what I would think a kid sees when they first go to the zoo and they see an elephant for the first time. I'm like, oh my God, that elephant, right? But every kid in this world like knows what an elephant looks like, right? That's like an international thing. So I want children to recognize microbes just like they would recognize an elephant or a lion or something like this. And if we can get to this point where we acknowledge that we are all dependent on these microbes in our gut, in our soils, in the compost, then I think that understanding leads to people just wanting to do it. I think it's something that draws you in. As soon as you're like unlocked, it's like a rabbit hole. Like
and
you're just going deeper.
Part of what I think you're describing is a kind of literacy, right? A microbiological literacy, which absolutely, I think kids should be developing this at a very early age. I mean, when I was young, kids used to eat dirt, right? And play in dirt.
Yeah, we need a shift away from germs. I mean, it's like most kids know microbes as germs, as something bad, but there truly aren't a lot of really bad microbes. They're just imbalances, or like some microbes where you're missing other microbes to like keep those bad ones in check. And it's really a mindset shift.
So zero me back in on the marketing piece, because what you're describing, which I love, right, from a Metaviews perspective, is an ecosystem, right? You're trying to build partnerships. You're trying to, I was sort of scrolling through the website. You're trying to build resources and tools that really allow for this to spread and allow for people, as you were saying, to build the kind of community composting initiatives, to demonstrate to industry why this could be a thing. You talked a little about mandates, and I was thinking about incentives myself, right? That there's lots of ways. And for example, you could encourage property owners with tax credits, right? That if they're actively composting, they get a reduction in their property tax. But and I'm conscious that we're almost out of time. But where do you see the marketing piece in terms of, who are the people that you're trying to reach and communicate? Because I would agree with you in general that the champions of composting, the champions of a lot of the stuff we're talking about, they're either busy practitioners who are doing their thing kind of nose to the ground, or they're scientists who are kind of like, let the data speak for itself. But there aren't many people like yourself who are really championing it, who are really promoting it.
Yeah.
So tell me about that.
I'm encouraging these folks to come out of their shell and to realize that we live in a digital online world. So what I've been doing last year a couple times is what I call the 30-day compost content challenge. And the challenge is to post 30 days in a row about your perspective, your experience with compost, with soil, food waste, all the adjacent things. And it is a challenge because a lot of people feel uncomfortable putting themselves out there. And if we're doing it in a group, and then it's more fun and you feel encouraged. So that's like what we do in this group. I give those people resources. I have like a online course and templates and worksheets, how to create and publish content on a regular basis. I have published myself on LinkedIn the last 3 years. I published 1,000 times, so like almost every day, because I made a commitment to do that. So anybody today that listens to this podcast I would highly encourage you to just put yourself out there, because we need to be vocal about this. I always say the microbes can't talk. We need to be their voice. But on the other end, it's also, you will gain so much from this that you can't even imagine possible. So in my position, it's like people reach out to me from all over the world now, because I am a voice for composting. I have people from, like, really from China, from Turkmenistan, from Mexico, Canada, like globally, from Europe, from Africa, and it's amazing to get that feedback. So it's you will get something in return. People will reach out to you, and you'll get other perspectives, and you'll, even if you are really good in what you do, you'll gain more knowledge too. So it's like, it's yeah. And the other thing is, you don't need to get millions of views. You don't need to get, it's like, don't compare yourself to those shiny influencer people,
It's about friends and family, right? It's about the
yeah,
people who trust you and getting it out there, and then you kind of build a kind of critical mass. And with that in mind, the last segment we always have on our show, we call shout outs. And the shout outs is really meant to kind of, shout outs are really meant to let our audience know of people who you think they should know, who, you might be thinking of, who you were influenced by. And, think of it as both a sign of respect and a sign of affection. So is there anyone you want to give a shout out to today?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to give a shout out to everyone who's already composting and doing the work. You guys are amazing. And, that's clear. Anybody who diverts their food wastes and composts them in their garden and does something, big shout out to you guys. And I'm going to just drop some names also as a resource for you. And like you said, people that influenced me. And I want to mention Gabe Brown, regenerative rancher. Look him up. I want to mention Greg Judy, regenerative rancher. I want to mention Matt Powers. He's got a fantastic curriculum on soil. I want to mention Catalyst Bioamendments out of California. Also a fantastic resource. They're starting the Compost Academy. So if you're looking to learn more, look them up. If you're on a commercial level, join the US Composting Council. Yeah, I guess, and yeah, I think that's who comes to mind and really deserves a shout out here.
Well, thank you, Tim. This has been really a fantastic discussion. I mean, I personally think that there's nothing more important in soil. So I kind of see you as a revolutionary, a leader who's doing the kind of grassroots organizing and community mobilization that we require. Metaviews loves to talk to revolutionaries. We love to talk to leaders. So if you're someone like Tim, who is doing the kind of on-the-ground work that Tim's doing, please get in touch. We'll have Tim's contact info in the show notes so you can reach out to him. I love, Tim, that you had a hashtag, which is very inclusive, right? It tells people, come on, join me. Let's do this. All right, thanks again. We'll be back soon. Until then, keep your eyes on the Metaviews.